Be me, Ian, just a normal guy trying to get by. I work a 9 to 5 job that pays the bills. It's not glamorous. I stare at spreadsheets until my eyes glaze over. I drink mediocre office coffee, and I count down the minutes until I can go home and do literally anything else. It's the corporate equivalent of vanilla ice cream. Not exciting, but stable. For years, the office was my quiet place. Not in a good way, more in a everyone minds their own business kind of way. Our department was a small, well-oiled machine. We had our roles, we did our work, and we went home. The unspoken rule was simple. Don't be an idiot, do your job, and don't make things difficult for anyone else. Our manager was this old guy, practically a relic from a bygone era of business. Let's call him Mr. Henderson. His management style consisted of 2 questions. Is the work done, and are there any problems? If the answer to the first was yes and the second was no, he'd nod and shuffle back to his office to read the newspaper online. It was perfect. A low-stress environment where competence was all that mattered. The closest thing I had to a work friend was Raymond. Raymond was our IT guy, a true wizard. He lived in the server room, a chilly, humming cave he called the Sanctuary. He was a cynical, sarcastic dude who had seen every kind of corporate nonsense and survived. He was fueled by a steady diet of energy drinks and the quiet suffering of his coworkers who couldn't figure out how to turn their monitors on. Going to him with a problem was a ritual. You'd enter the sanctuary, state your issue, and he'd sigh like you just asked him to solve world hunger. Then he'd type 3 commands and fix everything in 10 seconds. A true genius. Then there was Sarah, our lead graphic designer. She was incredibly quiet but produced amazing work. She'd come to work, put on her massive headphones, and enter a state of pure creative flow for 8 hours straight. Her interactions were minimal and to the point. Need the logo in blue? Okay. And an hour later, you'd have a perfect blue logo. We all coexisted peacefully. The office suck-up would try to impress people. The social butterfly would organize after-work drinks that most of us ignored. And the rest of us just kept our heads down. The ecosystem was balanced. Then, the email arrived. Mr. Henderson was retiring. After 40 years with the company, he was finally hanging it up. Good for him. The corporate email announcing his departure was followed by another, introducing our new manager. Her name was Heather. The email was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords. It praised her dynamic leadership, her forward-thinking approach to workplace culture, and her passion for fostering inclusive and synergistic environments. I read that sentence and felt a cold dread creep up my spine. Raymond sent me a message on the internal chat. R.I.P. us. I knew he was right. Heather arrived a week later. She had that specific look of someone who believes their job is not to manage a team, but to enlighten the peasants. She had a haircut you could set a level on and wore sharp, uncomfortable-looking business attire. She walked in on her first day like she was liberating a third-world country. The first team meeting was a sign of things to come. We all gathered in the conference room. Mr. Henderson's meetings used to last 10 minutes. Here's what we need to do. Any questions? No? Good. Get to it. Heather's first meeting lasted 2 hours. We didn't talk about a single work-related project. Instead, we did icebreakers. We had to go around the room and state our name, our role, and a personal truth. When it was Raymond's turn, he just said, "Raymond, it. I believe that entropy will eventually win and all of this is meaningless." Heather gave a tight, forced smile and quickly moved on. She then unveiled her grand vision for the department. She talked for an hour straight about reevaluating our core principles, breaking down old hierarchical structures, and creating a safe space for vulnerability. I just wanted to go back to my desk and finish a report that was due by 3 p.m. The next few weeks were a slow-motion descent into corporate hell. First, she rearranged the entire office layout. She got rid of our cubicles, which she called isolating boxes of conformity. She replaced them with a massive open-plan layout with hot desks. No one had an assigned seat. You just had to find an empty spot every morning. It was supposed to encourage collaboration. In reality, it just meant you could hear every single phone call, every cough, and every painfully loud keystroke from the guy who types with only his index fingers. Productivity plummeted. Sarah couldn't concentrate with all the noise. Raymond barricaded himself in his server room and refused to come out unless it was a level 1 emergency. Then came the mandatory weekly workshops. Every Friday afternoon, for 2 hours, we had to attend a session on some new corporate doctrine. The first one was on unconscious bias. Heather showed us a slideshow that basically accused us all of being secretly terrible people without even knowing it. Another was on effective allyship. We had to role-play scenarios where we called out problematic behavior. The office suck-up, a guy named Tim, absolutely loved it. He was a master of performative agreement, nodding at everything Heather said and asking leading questions like, "That's a brilliant point, Heather. How can we, as men, do more to check our privilege in the break room?" It was nauseating. The actual work started to suffer. Deadlines were being missed. Clients were getting antsy. But whenever anyone brought up a project-related issue, Heather would steer the conversation back to her cultural crusade. Yes, the client is unhappy, but what's more important is that we address the systemic issues that led to this communication breakdown. Let's circle back and unpack our internal biases first. One day, I made a fatal mistake. In the team chat, I needed to ask a question to a group of 3 colleagues, 2 guys and a girl. I typed, "Hey guys, does anyone have the latest figures for the Q3 report?" A few seconds later, I got a private message from Heather. "Ian, my office, now." I walked over, confused. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake on a report. I sat down. She stared at me from across her desk, her expression one of profound disappointment. She told me that my use of the word guys was exclusionary and a form of microaggression. She explained that it contributed to a workplace culture that sidelines non-male identifying individuals. I just sat there, my brain struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. I was being formally reprimanded for a greeting I've used my entire life without a single person ever having a problem with it. She made me verbally agree that I would be more mindful of my language in the future. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd just been lectured by a high school principal. That was the moment my passive annoyance turned into genuine resentment. This wasn't about making a better workplace. This was about power. It was about her imposing her rigid, humorless ideology on all of us. The atmosphere in the office grew colder and more paranoid. People stopped talking to each other for fear of saying the wrong thing. Emails became sterile and formal. The easy camaraderie we once had was completely gone, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. We were all just walking on eggshells, trying to survive until 5 p.m. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. One morning, we all received a calendar invite for a mandatory department-wide policy announcement. The meeting was in an hour. No other details were provided. A sense of dread filled the open plan office. We all knew this was going to be bad. We filed into the conference room. Heather was standing at the front, next to a whiteboard. She had a look of grim determination on her face, like a general about to send her troops into battle. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I've been observing our department's culture for the past few months, and while we've made some progress, there is still much work to be done." Oh boy, here we go. She talked about the importance of identity and recognition. She said that to truly be an inclusive space, we needed to go beyond just avoiding harmful language. We needed to proactively affirm each other's identities. And then she dropped the bomb. Effective immediately, it is now company policy for this department that all employees must display their personal pronouns in their email signatures and all internal communication profiles. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the industrial-grade carpeting. She continued, her voice rising with evangelical fervor. "This will eliminate any ambiguity and prevent the painful experience of being misgendered. This is a crucial step toward building a workplace of true psychological safety." She turned to the whiteboard and wrote down examples. John Doe, he/him. Jane Smith, she/her. Alex Ray, they/them. She then said the words that sealed her fate. "This is not optional. This is a mandatory requirement. Refusal to comply will be noted in your performance reviews and may result in disciplinary action. We expect everyone to have their profiles updated by the end of the day. An email with detailed instructions will be sent out shortly." She looked around the room, expecting applause or at least nods of agreement. All she got were blank, soul-crushing stares, except, of course, from Tim the suck-up. "Heather, this is such a brave and necessary step," he gushed. "Thank you for being a true leader." She gave him a grateful smile. The rest of us just sat there, stunned. This was it, the final straw. It wasn't about the pronouns themselves, it was about being forced. It was the authoritarian mandate, the threat of punishment for not conforming to her specific worldview. She was turning our workplace into a re-education camp, and our email signatures were to be our public declarations of loyalty. The meeting ended. We shuffled back to our desks in a daze. A moment later, the promised email arrived. It was long and filled with condescending explanations of what pronouns are, why they're important, and a step-by-step guide on how to update our profiles. It reiterated the threat. Compliance was mandatory. As if on cue, a notification popped up from our team chat. Tim had updated his profile. His name now read, Tim Brewer, he/him, Allie. I stared at the screen, feeling a level of impotent rage I hadn't experienced in years. This was no longer just an annoying job. It had become a battle of wills. I couldn't just quit. I needed the job, but I couldn't just roll over and accept this. My mind was racing. What could I do? What could any of us do? We were trapped. She had all the power. She had corporate policy and the entire HR industrial complex on her side. Any form of direct protest would be professional suicide. We'd be branded as bigots and fired before we could even pack our desks. I leaned back in my chair, feeling utterly defeated. Then, my computer's chat program pinged. It was a private message from Raymond. Come to the sanctuary. We need to talk. I walked over to the server room, my footsteps echoing slightly in the unnaturally quiet office. The air was thick with tension. Everyone was at their desk, staring at their screens, probably contemplating the same thing I was, surrender or annihilation. I pushed open the heavy door to the sanctuary. The blast of cold air hit me first, followed by the low, constant hum of the server racks. Raymond was sitting in his throne, a worn-out gaming chair, bathed in the blue glow of his multiple monitors. An open can of some neon green energy drink sat sweating on a stack of old hard drives. He didn't turn around. He just pointed to a rickety stool he kept for visitors. I sat down, the silent stretch for a moment, broken only by the fans. So, he finally said, his eyes still glued to a screen filled with scrolling code. The Queen has issued her decree. I told him I was at a loss. I explained how I saw no way out of this. Any pushback would be career suicide. We'd be painted as troublemakers and probably fired for creating a hostile work environment. Raymond took a long sip of his drink, then slowly swiveled his chair to face me. For the first time that day, I saw a glint in his eyes. It wasn't despair. It was the look of a man who enjoys a complex problem. You're thinking like a pawn, Ian, he said. You're thinking about how to fight her rules. That's a losing game. The trick is not to break the rules, but to follow them so perfectly that they break her. I must have looked confused because he leaned forward. It's a concept from the old internet forums, malicious compliance. He laid it out for me. The logic was so simple, so elegant. It was beautiful. Heather's power came from her rigid, unassailable moral high ground. She had built a fortress of corporate buzzwords and HR policies. Attacking it head-on was impossible. But every fortress has a flaw. Hers was hypocrisy. She demanded we state our pronouns to respect personal identity. The unspoken assumption was that we'd all use the standard, boring ones she put on the whiteboard, but the policy didn't say we had to. Her entire ideology was based on the premise that a person's self-declared identity is sacred and must be accepted without question. If we declared our identities, she would be forced to accept them. If she questioned our choices, she would be guilty of the very crime she accused everyone else of, invalidating someone's identity. She'd be a hypocrite. The weapon she had designed to control us could be used to disarm her completely. She wants us to play her game, Raymond finished, a slow grin spreading across his face. So, we're going to play. We're going to play it harder than she ever imagined. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. He was right. It was brilliant. It was risky, but it was the only move we had. We spent the next half hour brainstorming. We needed something that was absurd but not overtly offensive. Something that sounded just ridiculous enough to be deniable. I decided on mine first. It felt right. A little bit of old-world mockery for her new-world tyranny. Raymond chose his with a quiet, evil satisfaction. The next step was crucial. This couldn't just be the two of us. It had to be a movement, a quiet, grassroots rebellion. We had to pick our first allies carefully. We started with Dave, a guy from the analytics team. He was a military veteran, a no-nonsense guy who had been openly complaining about Heather's workshop since day one. I sent him a message. "Got a minute? Meet us in the back stairwell." He showed up a few minutes later, looking wary. Raymond laid out the plan. Dave listened, his expression unreadable. When Raymond finished, Dave was silent for a long moment. Then he broke into a wide grin. "I'm in," he said. "Count me in." Next was the big test, Sarah. She wasn't a complainer, she kept to herself. But we knew Heather's open office plan and constant interruptions were killing her productivity and stressing her out. She represented the silent, competent majority who just wanted to be left alone. If we could get her on board, we knew the idea had merit beyond just a few disgruntled guys. I walked over to her desk. She had her headphones on, her eyes locked on a complex design she was working on. I gently tapped her shoulder. She jumped, startled. She pulled one side of her headphones off, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Sorry to bother you, Sarah," I started, "but a few of us are planning a coordinated response to the new email policy. It's a bit unconventional. Are you interested?" I explained the plan of malicious compliance. I watched her face carefully. Her expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity, and then to a subtle, almost imperceptible amusement. A tiny smile played on her lips. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll do it." That was it. The rebellion was real. We spent the next hour quietly spreading